All right, so warning signs have you ignored in the past, thinking that they might not apply to you?
Get them. All of the above.
Maybe taking food in the movie theater when no outside food or drinks are allowed.
Sampling those grapes at the, grocery store.
Apparently not. Something that you might not get caught, but if you did, then it wasn't jail sentence. But it was definitely something that you knew was a warning before it took place.
They gonna kick us out the theater if we bring that in?
I don't know if they kick you out, but they might actually All right, so we are going to we're going through 2 Kings, but we might go a little bit, we are going to go a little bit back into 1 Kings a little bit because we ended with Solomon. And so the 1 and 2 Kings is actually considered one continuous book. So before we begin in 2 Kings, we want to go a little bit back. But there are a couple questions that are things that happened in 2 Kings that we might have a couple questions about, as far as why would God allow his chosen city, which is Jerusalem, and the temple to be destroyed? What were the consequences for Israel and Judah's sin? And the sinful acts of God's people is seen all throughout 2 Kings, especially in the description of both the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. We'll kind of break that down a little bit as we go along. So tonight we're going to focus on God warned Israel to keep his statutes and laws, or they would be punished because of their disobedience by being exiled from the promised land.
Right, so I actually have 3 scriptures that kind of deal with all of this. If somebody can grab Leviticus chapter 18, verses 3 through 5, and then verses 24 and 30. If somebody can grab Deuteronomy 4, verses 25 through 31. And then if someone can grab 1 Kings chapter 9, verses 6 through 9. So like Kelly said, God warned Israel to keep the statutes and his laws. And we see this repeated over and over and over and over and over again. And this is kind of what we're going to deal with here. So God warns the first generation in Leviticus. Who has Leviticus 18?
It reads, "You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt, where you lived, and you shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan, to which I am bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes. You shall follow my rules and keep my statutes and walk in them. I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my rules. If a person does them, he shall live by them. I am the Lord."
Yeah. So there's the first warning right there to the first generation. Just came out of exile from slavery in Egypt. So now we're going to move to the second generation. So some of the people have died off already. So now we got the new and up and coming Israel coming up. Who has Deuteronomy chapter 4?
Deuteronomy 4, 25, 31.
Yes, sir.
When you beget children and grandchildren and have grown old in the land, and act corruptly and make carved image in the form of anything and do evil in the sight of the Lord your God, to provoke him to anger, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, that you will soon utterly perish from the land which you cross over the Jordan to possess. You will not prolong your days in it, but will be utterly destroyed. And the Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations where the Lord will drive you. And there you will serve gods, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell. But from there you will seek the Lord your God, and you will find him if you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul. When you are in distress and all these things come upon you in the latter days, when you turn to the Lord your God and obey his voice, for the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not forsake you, nor destroy you, nor forget the covenant of your fathers, which he swore to them.
see God's character revealed also in there, in being gracious, in being merciful, and not forgetting his covenant, but always remembering his covenant. So like we went over first in Leviticus, why must the practices be avoided? Because number one, the Lord is holy, so they should be holy. They were set apart. Number two, because the Lord is their God and they're his people. The Israelites couldn't expect to live in God's holy land forever and be able to do what they wanted. And you're kind of going to see what takes place in 2 Kings when we get to that. Also, the blessing of the land had to be followed by obedience. So, second slide. We just read Deuteronomy 25 through 31. Now, Moses warned them once again right before they crossed the Jordan, as Ulysses just ran. So we see that the Israelites lived in we learned that the Israelites' disobedience continued, and they did not do what God had commanded them to do. These were the warnings. They're not idle threats. God always follows through in full measure. So God keeps his promises of blessings as well as promises of judgment. All right. So many years have transpired. Now we're going into David and Solomon. So Solomon comes on the rule, and now we are in 1 Kings chapter 9. Who has that?
But if you turn aside and follow me, you or your children, and do not keep my commandments and my statutes that I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land that I have given them, and the house that I have consecrated for my name I will cast out of my sight. And Israel will become a proverb and a byword among all peoples. And this house will become a heap of ruins. Everyone passing by it will be astonished and will hiss, and they will say, why has the Lord done this to this land and to this house? Then they will say, because they abandoned the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and laid hold on other gods and worshipped them and served them. Therefore the Lord has brought all disaster on them.
All right. So we see that this is the second time that God has appeared to Solomon. And he's given him a warning and a promise. So the warning, I will cut off Israel from the land that I have given them and the house that I have consecrated for my name. So God already he has a place for himself. We see that Solomon built the temple and God put his name there at the temple. Israel will become a proverb and a byword among all the peoples. In other words, there'll be nobodies. They'll just be history. This house will become a heap of ruins. We're going to see in 2 Kings where the temple gets destroyed. Everything that was brought up in that temple is going to be destroyed by the Babylonians and the Chaldeans. Everyone passing by it will be astonished and will hiss, and they will say, why has the Lord done this to this land and to this house?
I find that interesting because what it said is that everybody, even with the Babylonians that destroyed it, everybody knows it was God. I mean, for them to say that, it was obvious, people recognize
That's right.
that God destroyed it.
That's right. And you're going to keep hearing this from me during this whole series. God's sovereign will being accomplished through his permissive will. He's going to use non-believers, the outside nations, to execute judgment on his people, his chosen people. But he always leaves a remnant, as we're going to see also.
All right. So after the death of Solomon, Israel and Judah became a divided kingdom. So Israel was the northern kingdom, and the 10 of the 12 tribes became the northern kingdom, whose capital was Samaria. For 200 years, the kings who ruled were not descendants of David. And once the kingdom has been divided, Israel, I found this very interesting. I never saw this before, but Israel in the Old Testament is referred to as the northern kingdom. So after Solomon's death, you see Israel in the Old Testament. It refers to the northern kingdom. 2 tribes, this is Judah, Benjamin, Judah, became the southern kingdom whose capital was Jerusalem. And for 400 years, a descendant of David sat on the throne. And so the war began. And so once they split into 2 kingdoms, they did not get along. And I just have a little map. I like my maps. Just to show you that Judah, southern, Israel to the north. Samaria is the capital of Israel. Jerusalem is still the capital of Judah. And then there's the dividing line. And then the surrounding nations around them.
So you can see where Jerusalem is the capital of Judah. That's where the temple is, in Jerusalem. Now Israel and Judah are separated. Israel doesn't want to go into Judah. Judah doesn't want to go into Israel. But Judah has the advantage because they can go to the temple. Israel, we're not going in there, but we're kind of going to dig into that a little bit in a minute. So, getting a little too far ahead.
All right. So now I have a list of the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. And then each side both had 19 kings. So after King Zedekiah, Judah goes into exile. And then after King Hoshea, Israel goes into exile. And these are just BCB years that they were kings.
So the northern tribes of Israel were captured by the Assyrians, brought to exile with them. And then with the tribes of Judah, they were captured by the Babylonians. But God always has a remedy.
All right. So this is just to show you that after Israel and Judah were divided, Jeroboam became the first king of Israel, where Rehoboam became the first king of Judah.
And that's not really Jeroboam.
Didn't look alike.
But Jeroboam felt threatened because of the worship, the temple, where the people worshiping in the temple in Jerusalem. So he decided to build 2 golden calves, one in Bethel and one in Dan, because Jeroboam thought if they go to Judah to worship God, then they won't need me anymore. They'll want to kill me. So it was just to show tell them like, okay, no more do you need to travel to Jerusalem to worship God. I built a calf in Bethel and a golden calf in Dan. You don't have to travel so far. These are your guys that brought you up out of Egypt. And so there begins the foundation of the false worship.
Can somebody grab 1 Kings chapter 12 and verses 25 through 33, and that's kind of where we are. So we already talked about the warning. Now we're starting to see the disobedience start to come into play. Whenever you have it, you can go ahead and read.
1 Kings 12:25 to
33.
Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there. And he went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn again to their Lord. To Rehoboam, king of Judah, they said, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold, your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. How far am I reading?
To 33.
33. Then this thing became a sin, for the people went as far as Dan to be before one. He also made temples on high places and appointed priests from among all the people who were not of the Levites. And Jeroboam appointed a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah. And he offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places that he had made. He went up to the altar that he had made in Bethel on the 15th day in the 8th month, in the month that he had devised from his own heart. And he instituted a feast for the people of Israel and went up to the altar to make offerings.
Right. So we see that Jeroboam, king of Judah. So now, Jeroboam is the king of Israel. Rehoboam is the king of Judah. Jeroboam decided, okay, we can't go to Jerusalem. And if our people start going to Jerusalem, they're going to want to be with their real king, Rehoboam. So I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to make my own temples. I'm going to make my own altars. So he made up 2 calves. Now you don't have to go into Jerusalem. You can go close to Jerusalem. You can go to Bethel. Or if you don't want to go there, you can go all the way up to Dan. So it's all the way in between the northern kingdom. So now there's no reason to go into Judah at all. But if we remember, God said, do not worship anything other than me. Do not worship graven images. Do not worship at the high places. He's making it easy for people, easy religion. When you look at that today, it's kind of the same thing. Easy television evangelism. You don't have to go to church. You don't have to fellowship with anybody. You can watch from home, bedside Baptist sometimes. But easy religion, easy what you want, when you want it, how you want it. So it doesn't take much to make your own religion, as we're seeing in here.
I think it's interesting too, the motive. The motive, you got to split, so now I got to figure out a strategy to make sure it stays split. So his motive was his own kingdom to seek him.
Yep.
Yeah, it wasn't really to become God or anything. It's like, okay, I'm king, and I know if they go back and confront with their own, with their own God, they might go back and become part of that nation, and I'll lose my kingdom. So he's worried about his position.
Exactly. In this study, when me and Kelly were studying this, there was a passage that Kelly had in one of her devotionals that I actually enjoyed very much. It's called The House Divided by John MacArthur, and there's an excerpt in there.
King Jeroboam became fearful that the people of Israel would abandon him as their leader if they traveled to Jerusalem to worship the Lord, so he decided to create some idols for the people to worship instead. He went well beyond this, in fact, by creating an entire religious system around his golden calves, appointing priests, establishing several centers of worship, even creating a special feast day for his newly invented religion. Jeroboam clearly committed idolatry when he constructed 2 golden calves and set them up for public adoration. Yet his idolatry was even craftier and subtler than that, and his actions illustrate the ways in which the world pressures Christians to create their own golden calves. Our own interests can become idols in our lives, motivating us to depart from obedience to God's word, even as Jeroboam did out of concern for his own kingship. Career goals, financial aspirations, dreams of the future, worldly prestige, and many other concerns can creep into our hearts like an insidious vine, choking out our commitment to the Lord. It is even possible to allow something that is legitimate and good in its own right to become so important in our hearts that it becomes an idol. Anything that takes priority over God's word has become a golden calf in our lives. You shall have no other gods before me, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Exodus 20 verses 3 and 5.
One other thing that stuck out with me, where it was talking about in verse 31, he made temples on the high places, which we know about. And then it goes into an appointed priest from among all the people who were not of the Levites. I think of that. The only people that were supposed to be priests were the Levites. So it's kind of like, you're a priest, 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 everybody's a priest.
You know, they ain't now online, so.
Exactly. Same thing.
But one of the things that it makes me think about is that, he actually builds the same thing that when they exited out of Egypt, they build exact same type of idols. And so it's partially telling me too that there's not a continual teaching of God's word from generation to generation to generation, because if so, they would have known what happened to the old and what we shouldn't be doing now. And so to me, it continues to tell me about knowing the word, telling the word, sharing the word from generation to generation.
They're not to be created. The only time we go with calves. I'm not doing my brother.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah.
So this is something that's very interesting here. If you look back in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 30 to 38, God has sent a prophet, Ahijah, to speak to Jeroboam when he was still 7, right? And he tells him, okay, I'm going to remove this kingdom from Solomon and give 10 to you. But if you're faithful, I will give it to you. So the thing that doesn't make sense to me is that he knows very well that the reason for which he's taking this kingdom away from Solomon is because Solomon is disobedient. And he did nothing to deserve this kingdom.
Right.
And he thinks that, okay, now my disobedience is going to enable me to maintain the kingdom. It just doesn't make any sense. God is going to obviously have to rebuke you trying to maintain the kingdom.
It's the same thing today with us. God tells us don't do it, and we kind of do whatever we want anyway. It's like, okay, here are all the warning signs, like we talked about it originally. Warned over and over and over and over again, and just continually, maybe we'll get different results.
Yeah.
I think not.
And I mean, think about it too, that the one point you put up before, that we often look at that God keeps his promises of blessing. And so we'll hang on that all day.
Right.
But we forget also the same is true that he'll keep his promises of judgment.
Yes.
And that's kind of what Israel, even us today, we kind of will, don't think about that too much, right? Yeah, blessings, yeah, God's going to bless. But we forget he also promised judgment.
Right.
And if he's going to keep one, he's got to keep the other. So, and I think they kind of lost sight of that too, because they continue to do the same thing. And he, like you said, they warned him. And I guess they just didn't think God remembered,
God forgot.
Yeah, he don't forget.
He didn't.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how we do today when we trivialize sin. We just make it like it's not that bad. Oh, I made a little mistake.
We think God is going to blink.
Right. It's like kind of, it's okay. You're my child. I'm not going to do anything to you. Just there's a little slap on the wrist. You'll be okay. No, sin is sin. One sin against one holy God is eternal separation. But I'm not going into there yet because that's getting too far ahead. And we'll see. Yeah.
All right. So somebody grab the 2 Kings 17, 6 through 23.
And then somebody grab. Well, we're not. Yeah, we might as well. 2 Kings chapter 25, verses 1 through 21. So we see all the warning signs, all the warnings that have been taking place, that keep being reiterated. We see all the disobedience taking place. When you get to chapter 17, here are consequences. This is where exile comes into play. So 2 Kings 17.
2 Kings 17, 6 through, in the 9th year, Hosea, the king of Assyria, captured Samaria, and he carried the Israelites away to Assyria and placed them in Halah and on the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. And this occurred because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods and walked in the customs of the nations, whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel, and in the customs that the kings of Israel had practiced. And the people of Israel did secretly against the Lord their God things that were not right. They built for themselves high places in all their towns, from watchtower to fortified city. They set up for themselves pillars and Asherim on every high hill and under every green tree. And there they made offerings on all the high places, as the 8 nations did whom the Lord carried away before them. And they did wicked things, provoking the Lord to anger. And they served idols, which the Lord had said to them, you shall not do this. Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah by every prophet and every seer, saying, turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments and my statutes in accordance with all the law that I commanded your fathers, and that I sent to you by my servants the prophets. But they would not listen, but were stubborn, as their fathers had been, who did not believe in the Lord their God. They despised his statutes and his covenant that he made with their fathers, and the warnings that he gave them. They went after false idols, became false. They followed the nations that were around them, concerning whom the Lord had commanded them that they should not do like them. And they abandoned all the commandments of the Lord their God, and made for themselves metal images of 2 calves, They made an Asherim and worshipped all the hosts of heaven and served Baal. And they burned their sons and their daughters as offerings, and used divination and omens, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them out of his sight. None was left but the tribe of Judah only. Judah also did not keep the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the customs that Israel had introduced. And the Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel, and afflicted them, and gave them into the hand of plunderers, until he had cast them out of his sight. When he had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king. And Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord, and made them commit great sin. The people of Israel walked in all the sins that Jeroboam did. They did not depart from them until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had spoken all by his servants the prophets. So Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria until this day.
Right. This is where judgment comes into play. And if you look and heard everything, because of what? Why were they exiled? Their idolatry, their disobedience. Kept being disobedient. They were warned. And as in verse 13, yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah by every prophet, every seer, saying, turn from your evil ways, keep my commandments and my statutes in accordance with all the law that I commanded your fathers, that I sent to you by my servants the prophets. They were warned over and over and over again, and still did not turn from their wicked ways. Who had
Can I ask you a question? I just thought about this. I've heard it several times. So, like, what is meant by high places? I know we go through the Old Testament and they talk about worshiping and sacrificing in high places. Is that place where it can be seen, or is it?
Yeah, and there were places of really places of worship, right? They had set up that people would go to, and to worship. And so I guess a lot of the temples and stuff would be set up high for people to go to. Oh, I know I'm going over here to go. And so, and by setting this stuff up, above and visible, I mean, it's really, really bad, because that's the customs of the pagans. Here's Israel setting up those things in their land, supposedly now, and so that it's very easy. Now I can go find, go find where I can go worship an idol. Yeah.
That's kind of what I thought.
And then one thing with Israel, worship was only supposed to be deemed in Jerusalem, or true worship to the true God.
Right.
So when you're going outside of Jerusalem, outside of Israel, that means you're not worshiping the true God, the one true God. So,
But did you see that slipping that they did, and what we are going through today, where the church is kind of have that be like Mike attitude, well, we can't do anything but the world can. Why can't we be like the world? And you start, bringing a little bit more and more world into it. It seems like this is kind of the same attitude that they had. It's like they look around and see all these, God, the people that are not of God, just doing stuff that seems like it was great and happy and didn't seem to be hurting anybody. They wanted to do it too. So
history.
we kind of see that now. I mean, even with stuff, start drifting into the church. You start seeing things happening in the pulpit in the church that you never dreamed of would be happening, a few years ago.
Also, I see in this reading that God is faithful. Because even though Judah, when we read, when Pastor read the 19th verse, it shows that Judah was just as guilty. Was involved in the same, they had been sucked into some of these same sins, but yet God chose Judah, a remnant, and so he's faithful, even with their disobedience, and it's just like us. If God has called you, if he has chosen you, even with our disobedience, he's still faithful to his promise.
That's right. Because you think about Israel, they did nothing right. I mean, all their kings were wicked, but Judah did have a few good kings.
Yes.
And like it said, as Cynthia mentioned, I mean, they didn't keep the commandments, so they weren't good either. But they at least did walk in the customs, right? They were still trying to keep some of the customs, right? So, but yeah, Israel was just, as far as they could get away, they were gone.
Actually, before we read chapter 25, what we're kind of going to do, we're going to jump ahead a little bit. If you Go down in chapter 17 to verses 25 through 28, and this is where you see hope come in. And at the beginning of their dwelling there, they did not fear the Lord. Therefore the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. So the king of Assyria was told, the nations that you have carried away and placed in the cities of Samaria do not know the law of the God of the land. Therefore he has sent lions among them. Behold, they are killing them because they do not know the law of the God of the land. They're speaking of a different God. They're speaking of their God, the Baal. Okay? Then the king of Assyria commanded, send one of their priests whom you carried away from there, and let him go and dwell there and teach them the law of the God of the land, thinking still in their God, the God of Baal. So one of the priests whom they carried away from Samaria came and lived in Bethel and taught them how they should fear the Lord. So we see God's word still making its way back to them, so they know how they should fear the Lord. And this is where Kelly's going to jump in, because I know she wanted to talk about Samaria with that.
In verses 24, from chapter 17, it says, the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cuthkoth, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharim, and settled them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites. They took over Samaria and lived in its towns. So from the map, if you remember, Samaria was the capital of Israel. And so the king of Assyria is bringing in different nations into Samaria to not to replace the Israelites, but to kind of intermarry with them. And then that's where the Samaritans came from. In Jesus' time, they did not get along with the Samaritans, and so because they were a mixed race of people. So I just wanted to point that out because I thought that was very interesting how that came about.
Now we'll go to 2 Kings chapter 25, verses 1 through 21. Now keep in mind, Jerusalem was the capital of Judah. So just remember that when we get to verses 8 through 10 from there. And whoever has that scripture, read.
You can split it up if you want to. You want to read all.
Yeah, we'll do that. If someone could read verses 1 through 7, someone go 8 through 12, someone go 13 through 17, and then 18 through 21.
2 Kings chapter 25, verse 1. And in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came with all his army against Jerusalem and laid siege to it. And they built siege works all around it. So the city was besieged till the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine was so severe in the city that there were no food for the people of the land. Then a breach was made in the city, and all the men of the war fled by night by the way of the gate between the two walls, by the king's garden through the Chaldeans were around the city, and they went in the direction of Arabah. But the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all of his army was scattered from him. Then they captured the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and they passed sentence on him. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him in chains and took him to Babylon.
Too many names in this one. It's all right.
In the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, that was the 19th year of the king Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. the captain of the captain of the bodyguard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and he burned the house of the Lord and the king's house and the houses of Jerusalem. Every great house he burned down. And all the armies of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down the walls around Jerusalem. And the rest of the people who were left in the city, and deserters who were deserted to the king of Babylon, together with the rest of the multitude, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried into exile. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest of the land to be the vine dressers and plowmen.
Verse 13 through 17.
And the pillars of bronze that were in the house of the Lord, and the stands and the bronze sea that were in the house of the Lord, the Chaldeans broke in pieces and carried the bronze to Babylon. And they took away the pots and the shovels and carried the bronze to Babylon. Okay, wait a minute, I skipped. And they took away the pots and the shovels and snuffers and the dishes that incense and all the vessels of bronze used in the temple service, the fire pans also and the bowls. What was of gold the captain of the guard took away as gold, and what was silver as silver, as the two pillars of the sea and the stands that Solomon had made in the house of the Lord. The bronze and all of the vessels was beyond weight. The height of one pillar was 18 cubits, and in was a capital of bronze. The height of the capital was 3 cubits. A lattice work and pomegranates, all of bronze, were all around the capital, and the second pillars, and the same with the lattice work.
18 through 21.
And the captain of the guard took Sariah, the chief priest, and Zephaniah, the second priest, and the 3 keepers of the threshold. And from the city he took an officer who had been in command of the men of war, and 5 men of the king's council who were found in the city, and the secretary of the commander of the army, who mustered the people of the land, and 60 men of the people of the land who were found in the city. And Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took them and brought them to the king of Babylon at Riblah. And the king of Babylon struck them down and put them to death at Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah was taken into exile out of its land.
Thank you all for reading that. So, thing that sticks out, verses 8 through 10, remember, Jerusalem was the capital of Judah. Now we see Babylon coming in, plundering and destroying the temple. Everything that Solomon had put in there, all that gold, Babylon now has it. The only thing you don't really see mentioned up there is the Ark of the Covenant. But we do know that somewhere around this time, that's where the Ark of the Covenant disappeared. So Babylonians, something happened. Babylonians went in there. We don't know what happened. Pretty much. But we're not going to find it. So if you watch, if you hear somebody that found the Ark of the Covenant, don't believe it.
Go to
Indiana Jones.
Didn't find it.
Go to the warehouse.
So what region is modern day Babylon today? So in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So in Iraq,
Yeah,
I think it is.
I think so. Yeah.
between the Tigris and the Euphrates.
Yeah, I think it's right.
So that's what it happened.
maybe there. But we see the destruction of the temple. But then when you go to verses 11 and 12, that's the key also. And the rest of the people who were left in the city and the deserters who had deserted the king of Babylon, together with the rest of the multitude, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried into exile. So we see that he's carrying all these rich people, all people that are well-to-do, that are good big, strong people. He carried them in exile. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and plowmen. God still left the remnant there.
No, you said everything was
Okay. All right. So we're seeing little by little, you're starting to see the Gentile nations starting to come into play into this. And you kind of see King Nebuchadnezzar in this, as the king of Babylon. And you kind of see him later on in the book of Daniel. When you go to chapter 4, we're kind of going to glance over it, but we're not going to go into deep discussion about it. But basic overview. God has to humble King Nebuchadnezzar, and he is like a wild animal. Hair grows long, nails grows long. He's like a wild dog, wild lion, whatever you want to call him, living out in the wild, eating grass and all that. And then he comes to himself. God brings him back to himself, and the first thing he does is he acknowledges who the one true God is. And that kind of is where we're really going to focus and dig down deep in when we get into the book of 2 Kings. When you look at 2 Kings, it focuses on the time between their disobedience and their exile. When you read the last verse of 2 Kings, three verses of 2 Kings, which is verses 27 and through 30 of chapter 25, it ends with God's mercy being revealed as the king of Judah, Jehoiakim, is released from prison and pointing to the Davidic line being continued. And we know from the Davidic line we get, there we go. That's all right. So, what you have after that? Okay. So, yeah, now we're going to kind of jump back. We're going to go to 2 Kings chapter 4. Yeah, 2 Kings chapter 4 and 2 Kings chapter 5. What was your next slide on that? I can't remember. All right, so now, that's what it was, okay. So, how do we see Jesus in the Old Testament? So, the prophet's messages were the prophetic rebuke of Israel, including the kings and the leaders, for pagan idolatry, especially the worship of Baal. And they were urging Israel to turn from their idolatry and to follow the God of Israel. Christ's message, the prophetic rebuke of the religious leaders, Sadducees, Pharisees, for misleading the people and for having an outward righteousness while their hearts were far from God. It was also the identification of himself as the good shepherd who lays down his life for his sheep. He is also the giver of eternal life. All the prophets, all the miracles that they've done pointed directly to Christ through the same exact means. So we're going to go into Elisha and Elijah.
We're going to focus more on Elisha, but I just wanted to put a compare and contrast of the two then, because Elisha was Elijah's mentor. And so they both performed miracles. Elisha's was more healing and restoration, a continuous testimony of the readiness of God to respond to the call of need. And they prefigured the miraculous works of Christ. And we'll have another slide that actually compare and contrast some of the miracles of Elisha to Jesus. But I just wanted to show the compare and contrast the two.
Right. So we talked about warnings. We talked about being disobedient. Next slide.
Okay.
We talked about being exiled. All of that causes disobedience to exile, suffering. So, what is suffering? Anybody? Pain.
Misery.
Misery.
Torture.
Torture.
Anxiety.
Anxiety. That's a good one. Anxiety. What else do we have? Yep. suffering is to undergo or feel pain and distress, to sustain injury, disadvantage, or loss, to undergo a penalty as of death, to endure pain, stress, disability, death, etc. Patiently, patient suffering. Willingly, willing suffering.
Wow.
Ooh, all right. Next
Well,
slide.
willingly, if you think about it, if you truly do something that you know is completely wrong, let's just say, for example, you cheat on a spouse. You know willingly that you're doing that sin, you're committing that sin, you're causing that suffering on yourself, not just on yourself, but on your spouse or whatever the case may be, like as just an example of, so in that case, you are willingly bringing suffering upon yourself. So it is there if you're conscious enough to remember what you're doing in certain situations.
And there's a deeper look at that when you read the book of Peter talks about suffering. And that willingness suffering is really even more than that. It's suffering for the sake of Christ.
Yeah.
You know, you're willing to
That's
suffer
right.
to please your God. So you're going to step out into a hostile situation because God sent you there to talk to those people, and you're really going to throw rocks at you.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
So, Romans 8:28 and 29. 29 encompasses the whole thing. And we know, because we kind of use the scripture a lot, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for the good, including suffering, for those who are called according to his purpose to suffer. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to suffer, to be conformed to suffer, to the image of his Son, who suffered, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers who will suffer and are continuing to suffer.
Yeah, I like the way that this is read.
Yeah. So one thing, God's sovereignty chooses. So remember, God's sovereign will is accomplished through his permissive will. God is sovereign. God's sovereignty chooses, as a part of his plan, to bring suffering into the lives of various people under differing circumstances with varying results. The way you suffer will have different results than the way I suffer. But your suffering is, I can't go to that yet. Can't go to that yet. All right. Suffering is under God's sovereign control and can be originated as part of his sovereign plan. So all suffering that believers go through. When you look at Job, why did Job suffer? Because God sovereignly willed for him to suffer. So, next slide. What are the reasons for suffering? The reasons for suffering. If you go to Genesis 22, it talks about to test the strength of our faith. Genesis 22 is the account of Abraham getting ready to sacrifice Isaac, his one and only son, whom he loves. Where is your faith? God will use suffering to test your faith, to humble us. Can somebody grab 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10? If somebody can grab Hebrews 11, 24 through 26. And then somebody grab 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18.
Right, so 2 Corinthians 12, verse 7. So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong.
Paul, of all people, had reason to brag, to boast, and do all of this. And we see, as powerful as an apostle as he was, went to God, God removed this thorn, God said, nope. So to keep him from becoming conceited, a thorn was given to him in the flesh, to keep him from being conceited, to humble him. How many thorns in the flesh do we have?
We don't.
God will use suffering, ordained, will use suffering to humble us. Who has Hebrews 11:24-26?
By faith, Moses, when he come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward.
Moses, who grew up in Israel under Pharaoh, that means he had a whole lot of stuff. Had servants, had money. He willingly suffered because it wasn't worth it. God uses suffering to remove materialism from us. Who has 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16-18?
So we do not lose heart, though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light momentary affliction is preparing us for eternal weight and glory beyond all comparison. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal.
Is that scripture about aging?
A little bit,
Yeah.
but not really. Momentary affliction.
It doesn't seem momentary.
Yeah.
In the course of time, you know, if you think about heaven,
Yeah.
it's momentary.
Compared to eternity, of course.
Yeah. Momentary affliction that we go through on this earth.
He calls it light. If you look at his affliction, it wasn't light.
Exactly. But it makes us long for heaven. It makes us long for Christ's return. So, the reason God uses suffering to test our faith, to humble us, to remove materialism, to make us long for heaven, but ultimately to draw people to himself. The suffering that you go through may bring someone else to him. The suffering I go through.
For us to say, I have a prime example of that. So for Travis and I, like moving here, we moved here last August. And so it took us from August until we started here in the end of January. But everyone, his parents especially, kept telling us to find a church home, find a church home. And we went through, no, we're not ready for that, we're not ready for that, we want to get established here. And it wasn't until we started going through so many trials and tribulations that we were like, no, this is what we need to do. And since we've started coming here, things have just, because we're devoting ourselves onto God, like this is what we do and this is who we are. And it has made life, I won't say easier, but it's more, I have my trust in him. And my trust in him, and I know that God is going to take care of it. God is going to provide for me now. Where last January I was stressing about everything possible, and I don't stress anymore. I do. It's a lot less than what it used to be.
Redirected.
Right.
That's good.
So So it is a prime example
That's
of
true,
it,
that's true.
trusting within him is just, it does draw you onto him. And
Yes.
reading the Bible and studying the Bible and studying his word has made life simpler, so.
Yes.
And it helps put things into perspective.
Yes.
That's what that, because it doesn't mean the problems went away.
Exactly.
It's just that in light of the greater purpose, those problems are so trivial, you know. I mean, don't get me wrong, things start to flow, relationships, you know, you get all that, but I realized, so I was one of those when I first came to North Carolina. I started working, and I was the happy Monday manager. People was like, happy Monday, those are oxymorons. I mean, I got to the point where every day was happy Monday, happy Tuesday, because my belief is you can come in with the sky is falling and you have no place to go. But I was, you know, to that extent, to the point, even when I didn't feel it, people around me started to say that. And then I was like, you know, I started to think about it, and then by fellowshipping on Sunday, that renewed energy, that renewed purpose helped to start the brand new week. So people who like, oh, I don't want to go to church, there's something that you're missing in that fellowship, because that
That's right.
replenishing helps you go and tackle that thing, whether it's Sunday, whether it's Wednesday, whatever that is. But sometimes work was still there. It was still there, but I walked into that environment I think completely different because my perspective is different.
Or even missing a Sunday. I know we missed a Sunday. We were somewhere, and for the first time ever, Travis was like, I miss church. I really had to call his mom. I was like, Travis sent me like, he's like, yeah, it wasn't my son. I was like, no, it was, because it does. It renews you for that week, going into that week and starting that off right. You gotta help me with stress about you. That's how this works.
Right. So now, this is where suffering starts coming into play. So, Kelly, I'll let you take over on this part. Short version of it.
Okay, so in 2 Kings, beginning of chapter 4, it is about the woman who has to pay a debt, but she doesn't have enough money to pay the debt that she owes. So the wife of a man from the company of the prophets cried out to Elisha, and I'm in chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord. But now his creditor is coming to take my 2 boys as his slaves. Elisha replied to her, how can I help you? Tell me, what do you have in your house? Your servant has nothing there at all, she said, except a small jar of olive oil. Elisha said, go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Then go inside, shut the door behind you and your sons. Pour oil into all the jars, and as each is filled, put it to one side. She left him and shut the door behind her and her sons. They brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said to her son, bring me another one. But he replied, there is not a jar left. Then the oil stopped flowing. She went and told the man of God, and he said, go, sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what is left.
Right. So the thing that stuck out to me, and I kind of went back a little bit and went to the book of Ruth. And we see in here where the woman says, your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, but the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves. Debt had to be paid. Elisha's words in the 2nd verse, what shall I do for you? That stuck out to me. And then he says, tell me, what have you in the house? And I kind of looked at that as Elisha taking on the role of being a kinsman redeemer. Him taking on the debt. We know ultimately that Jesus is our true kinsman redeemer. Lord Jesus Christ, who brought us for himself out of the curse, out of our destitution, has made us his own beloved bride and blesses us for all generations. He paid the price in full to make us his purchased possession, his eternal bride, to which he for all eternity pours out blessings. When you read Hebrews chapter 9, verse 12, he entered once for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. So he is our true Redeemer. Next, we're going to go to, we're staying in the same chapter, verses 8 through 37. Overview of 8 through 37.
Excuse me. These verses are about the Shunammite woman who had built a room on her roof. Well, she was a wealthy woman, built a room on her roof for Elisha when he came into town. And he promised her a son, but the son died. So she begged Elisha to come when the little boy had died, to come to the house. And then when Elisha did, he sent his assistant, I think it was Gehazi, ahead of him. But when Elisha did go to the house, he prayed, he laid down on the boy's body, and his body began to warm with life. And so it was in comparison to that I saw the synagogue leader who came and knelt before Jesus in Matthew 9:18-25. He asked Jesus to come and put your hands on his daughter, and she will live. Jesus went in, took the girl by the hand, and she stood up.
The thing that stuck out to me was verse 27. And when she came to the mountain to the man of God, she caught hold of his feet, and Gehazi came to push her away. But the man of God, this is Elisha speaking now, but the man of God said, leave her alone, for she is in bitter distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me. Prophets are not omniscient and depend on God's revelation.
Yes, that's right.
If you read Luke chapter 2, verse 52, that kind of, I love how like the comparisons come back and forth. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. Jesus in his humanity was not omniscient, but in his deity he was. So then we go to verse 38 through 41 of 2 Kings.
So Elisha returned to Gilgal, and there was a famine in that region. While the company of the prophets was meeting with him, he said to his servants, put in a large pot and cook some stew for the prophets. One of them went out into the fields to gather herbs and found a wild vine and picked as many of its gourds as his garment could hold. When he returned, he cut them up into the pot of stew, though no one knew what they were. The stew was poured out for the men, but as they began to eat it, they cried out, man of God, there is death in the pot, and they could not eat it. Elisha said, get some flour. He put it into the pot and said, serve it to the people to eat, and there was nothing harmful in the pot.
It sounds like my cooking.
And we see here there was a famine in the land, but of course he was sitting there with the prophet, so there was not famine of the word of God. Elisha made hurtful food to become safe and wholesome. And as he pitched the flour in the pot, we see Jesus Christ, the bread from heaven, who is the antidote to death, the one who quenches the poison of sin.
John 6, 57 to 58. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father who feeds. So whoever feeds on me, he will also live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven, not like the bread the fathers ate and died. Whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. And we go to verses 42 through 44. All this is like different levels of suffering that these people are going through.
All right. So this is the feeding of the 100 and the feeding of the, just comparison to the feeding of the 5,000. A man came from Baal Shalisha, bringing the man of God 20 loaves of barley bread baked from the first ripe grain, along with some heads of new grain. Give it to the people to eat, Elisha said. How can I set this before 100 men? His servant asked. But Elisha answered, give it to the people to eat. For this is what the Lord says, they will eat and have some left over. Then he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over according to the will of the Lord.
Anyone see a comparison? So then, the last one, we're almost done. Praise God. You go to that.
Okay. So So I just had to compare and contrast between Elisha and Jesus. Elisha prayed to God to bring about his miracles. Jesus did not have to pray to God for miracles to happen. He just said the word and they happened, like Pastor was talking about on Sunday. The storm. He caused an iron axe head to float on the water, and that's from 2 Kings 6. Jesus healed, he healed lepers, and Jesus healed lepers. The iron axe on the water, and Jesus walked on water. Saw an unseen army of the Lord when the king of Aram was after him, and Jesus refused to call on the unseen army of angels to save him from death.
Alright, so the last one we're going to talk about, this is kind of going to go by pretty fast, but this one is like Christ is all over this. So when you go to 2 Kings chapter 5, and we're going to read through this really quick. We're only going to go to verse 18, so we'll kind of break it down little by little when we go through each verse. So 2 Kings chapter 5 is about the commander of the army of the king of Syria. His name is Naaman. So we already know he is not an Israelite. He's one of God's chosen people. He's not an Israelite. He's a Gentile, one of the other nations. So Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. That means the Syrians conquered over Israel, and God allowed it. So we see God's hand in the middle of this already. He was a mighty man of valor, very strong, deeming honor, but he was a leper. So, if you were a leper back then, you pretty much were an outcast. You were pretty much about to die. You were going to die. There was no cure for leprosy, no known cure for leprosy. And the person that conquered you, that conquered Israel, was a leper. God ordained it. Now, the Syrians, on one of their raids, had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. So now we have two people. We have Naaman, and we have this little girl that was raided and carried off from Israel. So she's suffering, he's suffering, because we're seeing both ends. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were the prophet who was in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." So she was just taken from her land, family killed, friends killed, or whatever. She's taken into servanthood by a person of another nation. He has leprosy. I see forgiveness in there. Somehow, some way, she has forgiven him. Because if that was me and I was taken into servanthood, I'd be like, okay, you're going to die. You got leprosy anyway. You're going to die. I'm just going to sit back, relax, kick back, and just watch you die. Watch everything just take place. But she shows him forgiveness and shows him a way. We're already seeing a way to go to Christ in this. So Naaman went in and told his Lord, "Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel." And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy." So they're going to Israel. Israel and Syria do not like each other, so he thinks that this is going to be a time for a war. And you'll kind of see that where he goes into verse 7, "And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, 'Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Only consider and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me.'" Meaning he's ready for a fight. He's looking for a reason to fight, any reason. But Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes. He said to the king, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me now, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elijah's house. So he's got a big old caravan heading over to Elijah's house. And Elijah, now remember, he's a mighty man of valor. He demands all this attention, and he's a big guy. And Elisha sent a messenger to him. So Elisha didn't even go to the door. He sent a messenger to him saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman was angry and went away, saying, "Behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand all over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than in all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" So he turned away and went in a rage. So, here's Syria, here's Israel. Syria does not like Israel. Israel does not like Syria. So it's already taking him to humble himself little by little to go into Israel to ask for a healing. He thinks he can buy this healing, but that's not happening. So they finds out that Elisha's there. He goes. He doesn't even get to see Elisha. He only gets to see his servant. So it's just like, okay, you're getting brought down little by little by little by little. And it shows that he went away in a rage. But his servants, so now his servants are now talking to him, came near and said to him, "My father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, wash and be clean?" So it's not like he told him to go out, go tie a bow around your arm and go out there and go cut off a dragon's tail and then eat part of it halfway burnt. And he didn't tell him to do anything crazy. He just said, go in the Jordan River, dip 7 times, that's it, and then you'll be clean. So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. We see the Gentile getting clean by the power of God. And now,
If I'm not mistaken, the Jordan River was a muddy river. So, there was a put down. You felt like there was a put down.
That's right. That's right. So then, now, remember, he just got clean. This is a man that deems respect and power and everything. He's been brought down more and more and more. He just got healed. He returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and came and stood before him. And he said, now he's talking directly to Elisha, "Behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel." He didn't talk about the healing. He didn't say thank you about the healing. First thing he acknowledged was God, and he forgot all about the healing. God uses the suffering of the little girl to provide him a way to get saved, a way to God, to acknowledge God. When you go to the next part, "Except now as a present for your servant." But he said, "As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none." And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Can't buy it. And when you look at Acts chapter 8, verses 9 through 24, where Simon the magician tries to buy the power that Peter and the apostles have with the Holy Spirit and healing, can't buy it. The gift of salvation is a free gift. You can't buy it. If Elisha did accept it, then that means you could buy salvation. Cannot happen. But this is where we're going to get to your homework. This is kind of very deep because I'm actually struggling with this. Then Naaman said, "If not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth, and from now on your servant will not offer burnt offerings or sacrifice to any god but the Lord." Now we talked about that. Sacrifice for Israel was supposed to be in Jerusalem. The temple hasn't been destroyed yet, so it's only supposed to be in Israel. That's where all the sacrifices to the true God go. Okay? So verse 18, this is the homework. "In this matter, may the Lord pardon your servant. When my master goes into the house of a false god Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the false god, when I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter.
So it's not changing.
He's asking for permission
Yeah.
to cower back, to shrink back.
Yeah.
And Elisha, his response, he said to him, go in peace. I am struggling with this because when you look at everything that has transpired, you see God telling the Israelites, do not worship any other gods before me. And then you read this, in this matter may the Lord pardon your servant. He's asking for permission to worship another God.
And it's interesting, when I see this and hear the request, it makes me wonder and look at the heart.
Yeah.
And so here, what he's asking is, my master is going to force my body to do something. So I'm, I have to do it because he's pushing me down. This
Right.
is, who I have rule under. But the way that the request comes across is, my heart is not bowing down. I'm not bowing down to this God, and that's, why I would believe that Elijah says, go in peace, because his heart is not subject or doing something false.
Yeah, keep in mind the king has, this guy's king of a pagan nation, right? So he probably has duties that he has to probably perform as king to their God, right? So he doesn't necessarily want to do it, but he probably, may the Lord pardon me if I have to go. I have to go in here to do this as part of my being a king or being in authority, whatever, so I have to go in here to do this under like almost like under duress, right? So please, may the Lord please forgive, can you tell me the Lord will forgive me, I think we're seeing hints of that.
And it did say bow in the house of women, but it didn't say bow to. There's not a bow to in that statement. So, I kind of look at it saying that he's not saying he's going to worship the false god, but he's going to go in and go through the motions.
So then we go to the last part. This is where we this is the last thing. I apologize. Kind of went over. So the last part, verses 37 through 41, this is your homework to think on. So we see that Israel went into exile. When you read verses 37 through 41, and the statutes and the rules and the laws and the commandments that he wrote for you, you shall always be careful to do. You shall not fear other gods, and you shall not forget the covenant that I have made with you. You shall not fear other gods, but you shall fear the Lord your God, and he will deliver you out of the hand of all your enemies. However, they would not listen, but did according to their former manner. So these nations feared the Lord and also served their carved images. Their children did likewise, and their children's children. As their fathers did, so they do to this day. That's what we're going to have. So just kind of think on that. Be prepared to give a response for next week. It's going to tie into the lesson we're coming from Ezra and Nehemiah this week. So, like I said, I apologize for going over. Maybe you all got something from this.